In 1600, the city of Potosi, in what is today Bolivia, has 160,000 inhabitants. It's one of the largest cities in the world. Larger than London. Larger than Paris. Larger than Seville, the port through which all of America's silver enters. And all of it exists because of a mountain. The Cerro Rico. A mountain containing the greatest concentration of silver ever discovered. The Spanish call it the mountain that eats men. And it's not a metaphor. 13,000 indigenous workers are forced to work in the mines each year under the mita system. They descend into tunnels hundreds of meters deep, with tallow candles as their only light, carrying sacks of ore on their backs. Mercury poisoning used to refine the silver is constant. Estimates of the total number of deaths in the Potosi mines over the colonial period vary enormously, but all agree they numbered in the hundreds of thousands. The silver of Potosi financed an empire. It paid Spain's armies. It funded the religious wars in Europe. It flowed all the way to China in exchange for silk and porcelain, creating the first truly global economy. Today we'll examine the balance of colonialism from a strictly economic perspective. What was extracted, how it was extracted, who benefited, who paid the price, and what economic consequences endure today. In the previous episode we saw mercantilism, the doctrine that wealth is measured in gold and silver, and that colonies exist to enrich the mother country. Today we see that doctrine in practice. And the practice was far harsher than the theory. The economic history of colonialism is the history of the largest wealth transfer in human history. And like all economic history, it has multiple dimensions worth examining rigorously. The colonial model was, in economic terms, quite simple. Colonies produced raw materials, silver, gold, sugar, cotton, tobacco, spices. The mother countries processed them and sold the manufactured goods back to the colonies, and to the rest of the world. The value added from manufacturing stayed in Europe. In Spanish America, the system was organized around mining. The encomienda system granted colonizers the right to demand labor and tribute from indigenous populations in a territory. In exchange, the encomendero was to protect and evangelize them. In practice, it was forced labor under a legal veneer. When the encomienda proved insufficient for large-scale mining, Viceroy Francisco de Toledo re-implemented the mita in 1574, an Inca institution of rotational labor adapted to colonial needs. 16 Andean provinces were required to send a seventh of their adult males to work in the Potosi mines each year. The production figures from Potosi are staggering. An estimated 40,000 plus tons of silver were extracted over the colonial period. Potosi alone produced approximately 60% of all the world's silver during the second half of the 16th century. That silver didn't stay in America. It crossed the Atlantic to Seville and from there dispersed throughout Europe and, via Portuguese and Dutch trade routes, to China and India. The silver of Potosi was the lubricant of the first global economy. In the Atlantic, another economic system of monumental scale developed, the triangular trade. The scheme was as follows. European ships departed from ports like Liverpool, Nantes, or Lisbon loaded with manufactured goods, cloth, weapons, metal tools, alcohol. Those goods were sold on the west coast of Africa in exchange for enslaved people. The ships then crossed the Atlantic to the Caribbean or the American coasts, where the enslaved people were sold to work on plantations. The ships returned to Europe loaded with sugar, cotton, tobacco, and rum. Each leg of the triangle generated profits. European traders gained on all three exchanges. Caribbean plantations were extraordinarily efficient wealth-generating machines from the owner's perspective. Saint-Domingue, today's Haiti, was in the 18th century the most profitable colony in the world. It produced more sugar than all British Caribbean colonies combined. Its economy depended entirely on the labor of enslaved people. In 1791, those people rose up. The Haitian Revolution, which lasted 13 years, was the only fully successful revolt by enslaved people in history. Haiti became the first black republic in the world in 1804. But the economic price was brutal. France demanded an indemnity of 150 million francs, a debt Haiti took more than a century to pay. Colonialism in Asia followed a different model than in the Americas, but was equally oriented toward wealth extraction. The East India Companies, Dutch and British, didn't initially conquer territories. They established themselves as trading partners. But over time, they accumulated military and political power until becoming de facto rulers of vast territories. The British East India Company ended up governing India for nearly a century, until the British Crown assumed direct control in 1858. During that period, India went from being one of the world's largest manufacturing producers to becoming an exporter of raw materials and an importer of British manufactured goods. Economic historians debate the exact magnitude of this transformation. Some, like Utsa Patnaik, estimate the total wealth extraction from India during the colonial period reached astronomical figures. Others argue estimates vary enormously depending on the methodology. What is less debatable is the direction of the flow. Wealth moved from the colonies toward the mother countries. In 1944, Trinidadian historian Eric Williams published a book that changed the academic debate forever: Capitalism and Slavery. Williams's thesis was provocative. He argued that the profits from the slave trade in Caribbean plantations provided a significant portion of the capital that financed the British Industrial Revolution. That the banks, insurers, and industries that powered industrialization had been built, at least in part, with money from slavery. Williams also argued that the abolition of slavery in 1834 was motivated primarily not by humanitarian reasons but because the slave system was becoming less profitable compared to industrial wage labor. Williams's thesis has been intensely debated for 80 years. Economic historian Stanley Engerman calculated that profits from the trade in plantations represented less than 5% of the British economy in any given year. Not insignificant, but not the main engine either. Other historians, like Joel Mocher and Deirdre McCloskey, have argued that ideas and institutions within Europe itself were the true drivers of growth. However, more recent research tells another story. Maxine Berg and Pat Hudson have contributed new evidence that slavery played an important role in British industrialization. Their argument is that it didn't just contribute money. It shaped when and how Britain's industrial transition occurred. Economists Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson propose a different framework. What matters isn't just how much wealth was extracted, but what kind of institutions were left behind. Colonies where extraction systems were created tended to stay poor. Those that developed more inclusive institutions had better chances of prospering after independence. The debate isn't closed. And it doesn't need to be. What is clear is that colonialism was an economic phenomenon of gigantic scale whose consequences extend into the present. For an indigenous miner in Potosi, colonialism was forced labor, mercury in the lungs, and the certainty that the mountain could kill you. For an enslaved person on a sugar plantation in Saint-Domingue, it was sunup to sundown work under the constant threat of the whip. For a weaver in Bengal, it was watching the textile industry that had sustained their community for generations be destroyed by British imports. But colonialism also built infrastructure, ports, railways, administrative systems. It connected regions that were previously isolated. It introduced crops, technologies, and legal systems that, in some cases, laid foundations for later development. The balance of colonialism isn't simple. Trying to reduce it to a single narrative, whether of pure exploitation or of civilization, is bad economic history. What rigorous analysis shows is a complex phenomenon with immense human costs, massive wealth flows from colonies to mother countries, and institutional consequences that still shape the global economy today. Understanding those consequences isn't an academic exercise. It's necessary to understand why the map of world wealth looks the way it does. 3 ideas to take away from this episode. First, colonialism was, in economic terms, a system of extraction on a global scale. Raw materials and forced labor from the colonies. Manufactured goods and profits for the mother countries. Second, the silver of Potosi and the sugar of the Caribbean created the first truly global economy. They connected Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas in an integrated trading system. Third, the economic legacy of colonialism is complex and remains the subject of rigorous academic debate. Williams's thesis, Engerman's estimates, Acemoglu and Robinson's institutional framework, all are valuable contributions to a debate without easy answers. Colonial wealth flowed to Europe. But what happened next changed everything. In the English Midlands, in the late 18th century, a series of inventions turned the world upside down. Water power, steam engines, and mechanical looms launched the Industrial Revolution. And nothing would ever be the same. That's next time.